let's look at a history leading up to PowerShell. First of all, we had DOS, 1981. It had to have these three files, io.sys, ms-dos.sys, and command.com. All three files had to be there for this thing to actually run. And it had the boot file, kernel, and then that interface, which of course is where we're actually going to be going here in our look at PowerShell. Next, Windows itself, 1985. Now, Windows 1, 3.1, and 95 and 98 all ran over top of DOS. So DOS was still loaded on the machine, and then these were just pictures or graphical user interfaces that actually ran DOS commands under the hood. From this point on, when we started having a new kernel, the NT kernel, things were different. Now these were entirely graphical operating systems. This continued on to Windows 8.1 and finally Windows 10 that we have today in 2015 is when that was introduced. Now, I mentioned that kernel. Up through Windows 95 and Windows 98, we had a kernel called the Windows 9X kernel, 9 something, and so that X is just a placeholder because we had various versions of it. However, Windows NT, which I did not picture in the last slide, was actually a business computer. It was designed more for server use, and it was the first one to have NT kernel. And actually, this was put out in 93, and you'll notice that 95 and 98, this should have said 95 there, in 95 and 98, we were still producing the 9X kernel. We were not yet doing the user versions. And then when Windows XP came out, finally we just switched entirely over to Windows NT. The next stop on our tour here is VBScript, 1996. This was an attempt to do some better scripting. It turned out that DOS and the command line command.com cmd.exe command line tools were not really capable of doing much scripting, and so we needed a scripting language in order to automate a lot of server stuff. And so Microsoft came out with VBScript. It was not particularly popular, had a lot of limitations to it. So then eventually 2006 PowerShell was introduced. PowerShell did scripting. It did a real-time command line similar to the cmd.exe or DOS, and it also was capable of remoting. And so it just filled a lot of holes. So that's what we have today, PowerShell, and of course that is the topic of this course.